YAML. sklearn, model selection, checkcv. Description: this function checks if the provided cross-validation splitting strategy is valid and returns the number of splits. It's mainly used to verify the setup for cross-validation, ensuring that the specified strategy is compatible with the dataset size and other parameters. Inputs. CV. This input represents the cross-validation splitting strategy. It can be an integer, a cross-validation generator object, an iterable yielding train, test splits as arrays of indices, or none, which defaults to 5-fold cross-validation. Integer. If an integer is provided, it specifies the number of folds, e.g., 5 for 5-fold cross-validation. Cross-validation generator object. This could be an object from sklearn model selection such as k-fold, stratified k-fold, or shuffle split. These objects define how the data is split into training and testing sets. Iterable yielding train, test splits. This option allows for customized splitting strategies. It should provide an iterable that yields pairs of arrays representing training and testing indices. For each split, none if none is given. It defaults to 5-fold cross-validation. X. This input is optional and represents the dataset that will be used for cross-validation. It's helpful to provide it when you want to check if the CV strategy is compatible with the dataset. Size. ND array or data frame. This input represents the data used for training and testing. It can be a NumPy array or a pandas data frame. Y. This input is optional and represents the target values for the dataset. It's helpful when using cross-validation strategies that require target information, such as stratified k-fold. ND array or series. This input represents the target values corresponding to the data in X. It can be a NumPy array or a pandas series. Outputs. N splits. This output represents the number of splits or folds in the specified cross-validation strategy. Steps. Validation. The function first checks if the provided CV strategy is valid. It ensures that the CV is either an integer, a cross-validation generator object, an iterable, or none. Split calculation. If CV is an integer, it's used to determine the number of splits. If CV is a cross-validation generator object, it calls the getn splits method of the object to obtain the number of splits. If CV is an iterable, it iterates through the splits and counts them. If CV is none, it sets the number of splits to 5. Metrics. Number of splits. The primary output is the number of splits or folds in the cross-validation strategy, which provides information about how many iterations will be performed in the cross-validation process. Visualization plots. Cross-validation schematic. You can visualize the split indices generated by the CV strategy to understand how the data is partitioned for each fold. Libraries like matplotlib can be used to create diagrams representing the data splits. Fine-tune parameters. None. This function doesn't have any parameters that can be fine-tuned. Uncertainty methods. None. This function doesn't involve uncertainty methods. Challenges and fixes. Challenge 1. Using an invalid CV strategy. Sample use case that resulted in challenge 1 providing a string instead of a valid CV object or an integer. Fixes to challenge 1 ensure that the provided CV argument is either an integer, a cross-validation generator object, an iterable yielding train, test splits as arrays of indices, or none. Challenge 2. The provided CV strategy is incompatible with the dataset size. Sample use case that resulted in challenge 2 specifying a CV strategy with more folds than pay. Number of samples in the dataset. Fixes to challenge to adjust the number of folds in the CV strategy or consider using a different strategy more appropriate for the dataset size.